welcome everybody. This is the third in our series of interviews. We wanted to continue a dialogue that began during the pandemic when we were all stuck in our homes, losing our minds very slowly, or not so slowly, and reaching out to artists around the world whose practices resonated with us. Some were friends, some we didn't know, and we enjoyed these conversations so much that Colette and I continued this dialogue, and now we started the channel as a way to keep a little archive, and we hope a growing archive of all our discussions. So yeah, welcome to File Exchange number 3.
Hey.
Hi. Hello. To introduce myself, I'm Auriea Harvey, and I am an artist living and working in Rome, Italy. My background is I was born in America, in the United States rather, but moved to Europe like 22 years ago, and lived most of that time in Belgium in a town called Ghent, which is famous for Jan van Eyck, his masterpiece, the Ghent altarpiece. So I lived in that small town for like 20 years, making video games primarily. And then a couple of years ago, decided that I should be living in Rome instead, and so moved here. Promptly got locked down because of the pandemic. But at the same time, have really enjoyed being and living here in Italy and in Rome in particular. And so I've set up my studio here, and that's where I'm calling you guys from. And it's been really wonderful to have contact with other artists during this time. And especially you guys, because there's so many layers of connection between us, and it's been really fun to geek out mainly also.
Yeah.
About files.
I know, Maria, I mean, we've had so much fun in terms of like, we've done like ZBrush Geek Out days, like we've, you know, just shared different tools, and then also
Geek Out days.
Yeah, printing Geek Out days, filament Geek Out days. I mean, we've had so many layers of geeking out together, and it's been magical. It kind of, it really helped get me through the pandemic personally, because it also, for me, this was like, because of that time, this opened up a new way that artists can have studio visits, and in a way that makes it easier for artists who aren't, everybody doesn't have to live in New York. You can, you know, be in all these different places and still have these amazing conversations that you would normally have traditionally done in a studio visit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
But before you start sharing, I do have one other question for you that I've never asked you actually, is how did you decide, because you came from the game design background, how did you jump into deciding you wanted to show within the fine art world? And like, I know you studied drawing in Paris, I believe, like at the Louvre.
Yeah, I studied sculpture too, though. I mean, long ago, in the early 90s, I was from 1989 to 1999, I was living in New York City. I went to Parsons School of Design. That's where I got my degree from. I studied sculpture there, and among other things, I'm easily distracted. So like I started there thinking I wanted to be a painter. I came to New York City like I'm going to be a painter, right?
Right.
But then quickly learned what design was, and started to really get interested in product design of all things, and thought I wanted to do product design. But then kind of I wasn't precise enough for that, and started getting into furniture design instead. So I studied furniture design for a year, meaning I made actual furniture like tables and like very strange things. But they were shown actually at the time. This was like, I have like news clippings from design magazines of like showcase work, you know.
Do you have any of it, or was it like left behind with moves?
It was student work, you know, but it was strange enough that people looked at it, you know. And but then I realized, quickly or slowly that that just wasn't my world. you know, and I couldn't get along in it in a certain sense. And so everything was like, go back to fine arts, go back to fine arts. And so I decided to do sculpture. You know, I let go of painting in a sense because it just didn't feel like the right language at that time. It was the early 90s. And for me, it felt like the wrong language for me to be speaking in. And these objects were really speaking to me, obviously. And so I studied, I went into sculpture and got really into welding and casting and all this. Sense. I mean, it's very much pre-computers being a thing that people really use, and definitely not for art. Okay. Yeah. But at the same time, I'll try to keep this long story short, but
no, we want to hear it. We want to hear it. This is so great for other people to hear as well, like to hear this, because I think this is what makes you so amazing. This journey is that's why you're.
No, it's a little crazy. It's a little crazy because what happened at the same concurrently with me going back into sculpture was the drop of the Apple computer, the first Mac to the I think it was the one that Parsons bought. Previously they'd had like a couple of IBM PCs that were running DOS and all this, but then they got Macs and like then they needed students to work in the computer lab, and it was the best paid work study job. So I was on it like first day one, like I can use a computer. And basically, because I had previously, when I was even younger, I was into computers very early. Basically writing in BASIC when I was like 10. Okay. So I knew something about computers, you know, but I was really into it when I was a pre-adolescent. I was a real computer geek, as one could be in those days. I mean, it wasn't like,
you had to really seek it out to be a geek in those days.
Yeah, you had to seek it out. But I had the magazines, you know, the magazines with the programs in it, and I would like, me and my sister would like sit.
My husband's a software engineer. He was the same. Saved up, you know, to buy all the little bits and
right. So this is to say that I've throughout my life gone back and forth between being a hardcore computer geek and being a pure fine artist. I don't know how to put it. When I got out of school at Parsons, graduated, it was like the thing at that time was desktop publishing. There was still no internet yet, okay, because I graduated in 1993, and so I wanted to design books, actually, because as we were discussing earlier off camera, actually, Colette, you and I both have this sort of journaling, sketchbooking kind of habit. Hardcore. I have a whole like bookcase over here filled with my sketchbooks from my entire life, actually, because I started making
sketchbooks was amazing.
When I was 13. So it's like, so I was in love with books at that time, and desktop publishing was like the way the thing I could do with my computer knowledge and maintain my art habit, you might say. And so I started working in publishing houses in New York City. Teaching the art directors how to turn their hand-done layouts and turn those.
They're kind of glued, inked. Yeah.
We were still doing paste up, you know, like photostats.
They needed a little hand holding into that.
So they were hiring young guns like me, like early 20s, translate their, you know, I worked directly with all the art directors, and I learned like a ton about design, like, so much. And I am very thankful for that period of my life. It was actually a really beautiful and fun time doing all that. But then the internet happened, and I assumed the moment I saw the internet, like light bulbs, fireworks, hearts for eyes, and I quit everything. I didn't make sculpture or do photography anymore. I didn't want to do anything but the internet, and I switched my artistic practice to completely using. I had used computers in my artistic practice at college, but it was not accepted at all.
It wasn't accepted until this year.
2000.
But there was no idea of like a student
like
doing any part of their artwork in a computer.
No, it has been so, it's still a fight, but I think they've lost the fight.
Even they lost it in the 90s.
Right. Yeah. No, but you'd be shocked. I mean, maybe not shocked, but like
I probably would be shocked actually.
Yeah. I mean, the art world is so it was so behind that conversation, and it was seen as very less than to make a digital file versus to make a sketch or to take a 2x4 and lean it against the wall and call it a day.
Don't forget the spray foam.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Yeah. You got it.
Hot pink house paint for good measure.
Yeah, you gotta have it. Yeah.
I had a professor.
Oh man, really? So yeah, it was. I remember the same discussion was happening around video art around the time back in the day. Like video art was also not accepted at that moment in the early mid 90s, and they also had a fight that they won. So at any rate, it was important to me. When I got on the internet to stress this notion that computer art was something that was viable, as in my work as a net artist was one of advocacy, in some ways, one of trying to bring, to make computer art that wasn't about computers, you might say. And so that's when I met my husband and partner, Michael Samin, and we had a collective known as Interpiate Zuper, which was a combination of both of our websites. Mine was Interpiate and his was Zuper, and we put them together. Anyway, whatever. And then that's when I moved to Europe, was
right.
So what year was that you moved to Europe?
That was 1999. 1999, the deal was that he and I decided, so then when we quit, it was making video games. There was a lot of reasons for that, but mainly I just felt like I had said everything that I could say with the medium of the commercial video game. I was kind of done with it, actually. And the decision to go back to sculpture, something I hadn't made in, however many years, 13 years, more, was one that I made because I discovered 3D printing, actually. When I got my first 3D printer, actually, I didn't just immediately buy one. I had friends who were making 3D printers. Some friends of mine in Brussels were giving workshops and making 3D. I kept looking at it going, what is this, And then there was a Fab Lab in my town. And so I joined the Fab Lab and I went there and I tried it. And I was like, this is kind of interesting. Because the thing was, having made video games for so long and worked with 3D for so long, 13 years, it was like, I don't want to give up this skill, it's this really clear. It was a hard-earned skill that I had developed, and I was like, well, I can't let this go, And so 3D printing felt like a way of connecting to something else that I felt was essential to my life. And so I started taking files. I had also discovered photogrammetry. So I was doing a lot of scanning, and it felt like I had a tool set coming on, that it just felt like, if I put all these pieces together, then perhaps I'm something.
After that, it was saying like how you didn't want to lose everything that you'd learned from the gaming industry in moving into your next career.
Right. Essentially, that was pretty much it. It was a real moment of stopping what I had been doing and trying to find a new life. Like the poem says, you must change your life. However, they don't really tell you how. And and so
he just ends it there, doesn't he? He's like, figure it out.
He just ends it. Like,
Yep.
So, but it was a real feeling like that. And there was all kinds of reasons for it, but I tended to do this, as I mentioned, like I vacillate kind of back and forth in my life, which I never really realized until I said it out loud to you guys. That there has been this real trade, like back and forth, pushing and pulling or whatever, morphing between. And usually that has required a sort of being in between disciplines. So when I was making games, it was kind of, you know, the for real intersection of art and technology, meaning that I know it was in a field of games where what I was making was somewhat too extremely misunderstood. And then when I decided to make something after that, I did not want to be misunderstood ever again, because I was kind of done with that. Like I'd spent my whole life being in between things. And I was like, you know what, I'm gonna make sculpture. And I thought making physical sculpture, since that's what I was mostly hoping to do, was such a time-honored ancient thing that no one could possibly, what could possibly go wrong? No one would understand. I'll never be misunderstood again.
No, yeah, the art world is all about linear meaning, and everyone always knows what you're trying to say.
Well, it was more just like I didn't want to be new at anything. I didn't want to be first at doing anything. Anyway, I know it's hilarious now. We can laugh about it. But at that moment, I was just thinking like, yeah, ultimately my dream is to just work in stone, like, you know, but I'll start with this print. And so I started making 3D printed sculptures. And
so what was the timeline on that? Because I'm actually trying to recall when you and I first met, and wasn't it one of the
during
ISC, right?
Yeah,
but did we ever meet at one of the ISC conferences or no?
Never.
No, okay. No, okay. Maybe we just showed your work at one of them then. I'm sorry.
Yeah, probably somebody might have flashed something at some point, but I wasn't involved with anything until first wave lockdown. My art career started in lockdown, and I haven't been anywhere or done anything art related in real life.
I just want to say, I just want to say that, I mean, that's so incredible that the journey you've just described, because I think without all of those different twists and turns and different skills that you acquired through those twists and turns, I think that's what makes your work really strong. I mean, I think, and interesting, and I think it's overrated to just be in one discipline.
Oh, absolutely, because you never learn anything from anything else, and it becomes more and more insular.
And you lose that beginner's brain, which I think is like very much akin to the artist's brain, because it's like when you have to like be completely vulnerable in a new tool and be the one who doesn't know about it, and then you bring your sensibilities to that, that's where I think some really amazing things happen.
Yeah, let me say though, to play the opposite of this, that what I learned during a certain burnout period I had in 2011, from 2011 to 2013, I was dealing with this really strong like computer burnout, and I couldn't work. Like I was still making games, you know, and all this, but I couldn't work for like a long time. And so what I did was I went and I learned how to draw. I started teaching myself how to draw, possibly in 2010. It might have started then, like seriously. I'm talking about like training, like and seeking out people, classes, and seriously, like, because drawing is something I've done my whole life, but I really felt like, well, why don't I learn how to draw? And it felt very essential, and every now and then I have these essential moments. So sculpture was sort of the same impulse, but different reason. And one thing that taught me, just to say, and what actually helped me through that period in my life, was that I learned that I could get good at something. Because working with tech, you're so used to that beginner's brain, you get addicted to it in a sense, and you have to, and you like it, you know, always learning and relearning. But at the same time, having something where I could have visible progress and really feel I was working towards a goal and actually achieving something with it changed in a way. It made me feel like, okay, maybe I can get good at something. I always considered myself to be very much a generalist. I'm very much a jack of all trades, able to absorb things, a chameleon, you know, whatever. But being able to think for once, oh, you know, maybe I can master something. And I know, Colette, that you're very into drawing and like make beautiful drawings. And so you kind of must know what I mean.
I mean, I think I think the two can live together. Like, and that's kind of where I like to live, because I do believe in mastery over a skill and bringing like skill to the table. I'm not a you know, proponent of like de-skilling or, you know, I am my background is traditional painting and drawing, and I absolutely adore traditional painting and drawing, and I bring that into whatever I do. But yeah, no, I think you do have to like finish a project and make something well in order to like feel accomplished, in addition to trying new things. I mean, I think it's got to be a combination of, if everything you did like didn't get finished.
Yeah, but it's more than finishing. It's more like you're striving towards something and hoping to do something that you know will never end, but at the same time it's something that becomes a part of you more and more. Right. So this is actually parallel this with how I feel about 3D. Okay. It's like I started 3D making things in 3D.
Give me 1 second. Whoa, sorry.
Yeah. Someone's at your door. Oh no, you're closing your door. Yeah.
It's the husband.
Okay. Yeah. We all got one of those. No, I started making things in 3D possibly in 2000. I want to say 2001, 2002.
That's the same time I started learning 3D modeling. Yeah.
And I
like
hated
early
it,
Studio Max. Yeah.
I fucking hated it. I really hated it. And I thought that it was the antithesis of art in some ways, and it really bothered me that people who were making video game art were all kind of making the same things, you know, and they were masterful at it though. They were amazing. The things I saw online in the mid 2000s, there were these people who could make anything in 3D and it was just beautiful, but it was meaningless and it was empty and it was kind of absurd and annoying and sexist and lacking any way I could go on. But I was constantly having this conflict, like, does to get good at 3D mean that I have to make these dumb things, you know? And
I mean, that was the culture at the time too. Like, if you've heard Claudia talking about Claudia Hart, who's a mutual friend, talking about some of the first SIGGRAPH conferences that she would go to, and the demo for a 3D modeling package would be like, you know, a very well endowed woman in a bikini on a motorcycle, and that would be,
or a big dragon, or like
and but yeah, like the misogyny of it too, you know, and the kind of exclusiveness. So that culture was a hard one to come up against.
Right.
And I'm sure the video game world was.
It was like, but I'm going to model this, you know, so our video games were very much the antithesis of all that, and that we wanted to make stories. And my first 3D character was this little Black girl in a white dress, and we looked forever for an animator who could animate a little girl like properly and make it elegant and beautiful, and we finally found someone. But it was just, this was the whole problem. So I was having difficulty not only with the tool but also with the concept around it.
Yeah.
But, you know, but I persevered in this environment not because I loved 3D, but because I wanted to do what 3D could do. Like, often my life is filled with moments where I'm using a tool not because I hope to get good at it or love whatever it is, but because the project I'm working on is so important that I know I have to make the project no matter what it takes to do it.
I means to the end. Yeah.
We can relate with that. It's like a constant. I mean, it's really painful having to learn a tool. I mean, I just started Blender and Substance like a week ago, and it's very, very.
Yeah, I'm maybe like a few weeks ahead of you there, not very far at all. Yeah.
No, I learned on Maya though. I started out using Maya, a little bit 3D Studio Max, and then I quickly rejected that because 3D Studio Max just did not work with my brain.
Yeah.
No, me neither.
For different reasons, to deal with other people who were in the project, but different projects. But Maya became my go-to for a long time, but it did something strange to my brain, you know, that whole folding down the Alt key thing. Like somehow it just, I didn't like the feeling of like, it felt like driving a car, like
the interface. Yeah.
You know, and it really, I don't know, when I stopped using Maya, I realized how much I hated it. And it was just like, and also
I don't like Maya.
Code everything. Like you couldn't do anything without a script, and like
at
the time, I don't know if it's still like that.
A little better. I only learned Maya because I got hired to teach it in 3 weeks, and I didn't know it. So now I know Maya really well. In the way that you only learn when you have to teach, not as an artist, when you just kind of find these funny little pathways and you know 5% of the software. So I'm kind of grateful for that experience, but yeah.
Teaching is the best way to push yourself with software. I feel like it's.
This is true. This is true. We discovered Blender very, very early on, back when before the Blender Foundation existed. They were selling Blender. Actually, in the beginning, it was a commercial company owned by the same guy. But he was selling it, and we bought a copy, and it had the game engine built in, and we bought that, and we made our first. They had a Blender plugin that was like part of the browser, so you could load your games or whatever you made in the browser, and we made a thing. Very early on, and this was even before we were even thinking about games. This is when Michael and I were still doing net art. We wanted to make 3D net art, you know. But I still wasn't committed to Blender yet. It was really bare bones, rudimentary. And then Blender as a company closed, and we were like, oh, that's it, you know. But then they reopened as the Blender Foundation. The software started getting really cool, started developing into what it is today, and the community around it. And so I embraced Blender stupid early on, like, you know, so, and I've been using it ever since. Awesome. And I wouldn't use it else because I mean,
I feel like I'm doing my students a disservice for not teaching them Blender and teaching them Maya. It seems like Blender is so much more up to date, and like the interface is much easier to navigate. I mean, I'm still learning, like I said, I've been using it such a short time, but the render engines seem.
People always used to say, like, Blender, it's so hard to use, you know, and I was just
okay, but for Auriea, I didn't start 3D until 2012. And then even later than that, didn't start actually doing it as much as I needed to do to really learn it until like 2014, 2015. Before that, I was just all traditional art. And the first piece of software that turned me to the other side was ZBrush. So I learned my first 3D program in ZBrush, and it was the one, it made so much sense to me. And then when
background,
and when I
ZBrush though, like that's a whole other beast. And like I was using ZBrush from ZBrush 1 whenever it came out as well, but it didn't make sense to me. Like in the beginning,
because you started in Maya.
No, it's just that it felt like it ought to make sense, but it didn't. It had a different it had a different paradigm back then. It was very much a 2.5D program. And then it was later that they introduced the 3D features, but it was still really hard to wrap your brain around switching between their 2.5D and 3D.
I mean, they need to take that out.
I need to take it out.
Evolve it. It's actually really a great idea. It's just that it needs to be as up to date as the 3D features. If they would do that, I would be really psyched actually to use it.
Interesting.
As like a painting program. Yeah.
Exactly. Like a 2.5D painting, I would be so all over that, like for real. But they still left it pretty much where it has always been, and that makes me a bit sad about it. And if they're not going to develop it, they should take it out. But
I think so.
It took me forever to learn ZBrush. Like I struggled picked it up, put it down, picked it up, put it down for years. I bought it around ZBrush 2 or something.
Oh my goodness.
Or I can't remember, but they haven't charged for an upgrade since. Like, it's just been
nice. It just keeps like, yeah.
It's the best piece of software I've ever bought. I was just like, this is the coolest thing ever. And they keep adding such great things to it over the years. So eventually I took an online course given by a guy named Ryan Kingsland. And he's the first person who made ZBrush make sense to me.
Isn't that your friend, Sophie?
Ryan Kittleson?
No, Ryan Kingsland.
Different Ryan,
Different Ryan. He has tons of YouTube videos, but he's always given ZBrush classes over the years, and he used to have tips and tricks YouTube videos. I haven't looked into what he's doing. Anyway, thank you, Ryan. You were the only one who made ZBrush really, really make sense to me. I had been using it even when it didn't make sense to me, but it made sense after watching his videos and taking his class. And so it was a struggle. Maybe it's not the most interesting thing to talk about, but it was a struggle.
But it was, I mean, ZBrush, it was a whole paradigm for me as well. And the only way I was able to learn it was by going on like a 2-week residency away from my children. 10 hours a day, like boot camp. But no, it was really amazing. I mean, you know, in my work, like I'd been using NetFab and I was only cutting and pasting and slicing and kind of removing, and I had no sculpt tools. Like I was using Mudbox, but that's pretty bare bones.
Oh, yeah, no sculpt tools.
No.
I always got that too. I'm sad that Blender ripped out, but other than that, everything else has been strength upon strength. ZBrush, on the other hand, I now feel pretty much like a ZBrush master, but it's like they keep adding new features that are just crazy and amazing.
I know, like some of the like cloth simulation.
But they stole that from Blender. Blender had that first.
Right.
Blender, there's a guy who develops for Blender, Pablo Debarro, and he's made Blender amazing sculpt tools. And I actually sometimes choose to use Blender over ZBrush, but this is where the sort of
I wish I haven't used those.
This is where that feeling of mastery kind of comes in. I'm going to start sharing.
Yes.
Where this feeling of knowing what you're doing kind of comes in, because I've been doing 3D for nigh on 20 years or whatever, maybe not quite that long, but it's a long time. It starts to feel like you can sort of choose what you want to do with it, you know, and I think that's an important feeling to have. I'm just going to say that. I think that when you get to the point where you feel like you're using the 3D and the 3D is not using you, it's a really freeing.
What do they say that takes, like 10,000 hours of practice?
Isn't
that the
something like this?
Yeah, you know, piano, like painting,
teaching it like for a couple years. It took me with ZBrush and with different 3D in order to really feel like that I could do what I needed to do or I could get out what was in my head into the space in a way that it was much trickier before. And then everything else is gravy.
Where my actual studio, I mean, we're in my studio, but like this is my actual studio. And
this is it.
What I mainly do
is seeing other people's hard drives.
Me too.
This folder right here called work, work, where every time I get an idea, I mean, I'm just going to share the whole process with you guys. Every time I get any idea, whatever it might be, any idea at all, doesn't really matter. If it's something that feels like it's not going to go away, it's not just something that crossed my head, but something I feel deserves deeper thought. I make
you wake up and you're like thinking about it still.
So I'll make a folder and give it a name, you know, so Death Dance is closer. A lot of these are projects or ideas that have been with me for many, many years. And so it's a big, long folder of things. Some things end up going away. They're not so important, but other things stay there like for a long time. So, and then where they did evolve from here, right? So if we go into I don't know, any one of we could start with this one just because there was something I wanted to show. yeah, so what'll happen is within each folder, there'll end up being references. And so that becomes either about
a great way to do it.
Yeah, so oftentimes a project will start with a references folder and it'll just sit there with a folder with references forever, you know, and then
I love those. Is it a mirror, like an ancient mirror?
Yeah, that's an ancient mirror, which is, I know, yes, something that's inspired you and like, and
yeah, yes.
In this particular project, it was about this, but that came from an etching that I had worked on years prior, and
with a mirror
about this, and so this was me working on the etching plate, and I saw myself reflected in the face, and that's where this whole project came from.
That's beautiful.
That is beautiful.
And the drawing that I had made, this was just made in a figure drawing class from that period I talked to you about, where I was learning to draw, and I was just doing hours and hours of life drawing for a long time.
Love life drawing.
And so when I retire, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to just clay, like portrait heads, all that stuff. I don't know how to do. When I'm 65, put it on the calendar.
Yeah,
exactly. So I put it's what happens is I end up putting things together like this. So it'll be like, you know, a drawing, an etching. These two things got connected, and I made this whole etching series out of the drawing. This actually became a sculpture as well. And this is from the life drawing. I mean, I was learning to etch, so I'm not a good etcher, you know, or anything. This was me learning. I was in an etching class, and like, so it's not really good, but it was just part of.
I mean, being a master printer is a whole different skill set, like knowing how to wipe that plate and like knowing like the different acids. Like when I took a printmaking class, those printmakers were like horrified by me. I was like, I want to do all of this stuff. And they were like,
yeah. So this is the printing plate I was abusing. But the point is that at this moment, I wasn't doing sculpture, but I was way more interested in these printing plates than I was in the print.
Right.
Like I was just like, ooh, copper. Oh, I love this. Etching, ink, acid. Anyway, so all of this ended up going together when I had an opportunity to take a clay figure modeling class in Florence at a certain point. And I made a clay sculpture. This was also this was 2017. So I had a 3D printer for a year here, and I was trying to think of making sculpture. So one of the things I wanted to do was to make a clay sculpture and then scan it in. And so that's pretty much what I did. I took a course with a guy in Firenze, Jason Arkles is his name, Australian. No, he's not Australian. He's American. He's American. He was in Australia.
Okay.
Erase that part. Don't put that in.
No, you're fine.
For some reason I connected him with him. Anyway, the sculpture itself is not stellar, but because I don't do this very often, but at the same time, it was
for the digital.
But it was a beautiful experience. Also working from a live model and making a sculpture with my own two hands, like hanging out in this guy's studio, and it was beautiful. And at the end of it, I did a photogrammetry and a handheld scan of it with my little structure sensor. And I also 3D scanned his studio in the end, because it was like, you know, you're doing photogrammetry and you're in this small space, and so you end up with a photogrammetry of the whole scene, and he was pretty jazzed about the fact that I had ended up 3D scanning his. So my sculpture was in the center, but I ended up getting the whole space. But that was what was fascinating to me about photogrammetry at the time. And I was doing photogrammetry and scanning. I was scanning everything. Like basically, if I was around it, I was scanning it. And so it's like I was fascinated by this idea that you could capture 3D form in a 2D form. And like that all I needed was this set of photos, and I had my 3D model. And so a lot of projects come from 3D scanning even now that I work on. But it's always this kind of notion of like, okay, I'm taking a note of this, you know, form. I'm not, it's got nothing to do with photography for me at all. Like it's not a form of photography.
Okay, interesting. Because it is for me, like, because that was my background. Yeah. For me, it was like it's a light lens, but there's many ways to understand it and come at it. I think.
it's just not like that. For me, in some ways, it's like a reference photo, like something like this, you know, that I'll collect and I'll be like, yo, okay, this is not about this moment, you know, or something. This is not about light for me. This is about capturing a silhouette, a form. In some ways, I consider when I'm scanning something, bringing something into this moment of eternity. I've said this to you before, like that it's not about capturing a moment, it's about bringing it into another time. Another kind of time. And so I scanned in that sculpture and then I started messing with it, because to me, it's not about the scan either. It's like, how can I take this and make some sort of, this is my stupid sketch, you know, that ended up being nothing,
no, it's great.
You know? It ended up being taken into some, it ended up becoming something entirely different, which is, it ended up lending itself to the form of the Cyclops sculpture, which I did bring to fullness, but it's the same, let me see if I have, it's the same form, really. It's the legs of that clay sculpture are part of this, mixed in with, let's see if I have much in the whip folder here. No, not so much. There was like a few things that ended up happening, like, so then there was the head that is still part of this series, that was like something I printed out, this guy, but so that's the head part. And like the body is just like me taking that clay modeled form and taking a series of permutations, blending it with another scan. Also in that case, I wonder if I can open up a meaningful ZBrush file. As you can see, I ended up in, probably, you know, Colette, you end up generating like 1.5 million like files.
Oh, it's rough in my files right now. I just realized after doing Blender and stuff that I have to like really be controlling over my naming. I was a little loose on the naming. Yeah. Oh, nice.
Like not the most meaningful set of files here. Yeah, I'm not very good with keeping control of my file naming, although I'm meticulous with my folder structure, and that
interesting.
That kind of gets me over, because like I know at least what folder it's in, even if I
don't
know
where to look. Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
I know.
With like, you know, number seven hollow, number 7 hollow.
Mine is more like this one works. You know, yeah. Actually, here's a tip that I use. I put like, if something is an export, because you forever like have files that go back and forth between different software, I put like the letters ETD right at the end, like export to delete. And then at the end, I do a search for those, and then I just delete them in a batch. Because you're always, that's the one useful file trick that I have, because you're always going back and forth between different programs. You generate so many versions that you don't need except as an export. So they're pro tips.
Smart. Yeah.
Otherwise my tab drive is a disaster.
Open, because I take advantage of that feature of ZBrush where you can save the history of your files, and I make movies out of them.
You do the history brush.
The time lapse, that's really smart.
Not only the history brush, but you can make a time lapse movie of your process.
Right.
If you save
you need to go on Instagram Reels with those, and
so this is the final, but like I'm trying to find a version of this that has like, so this was me messing with this 3D scan of this torso, because it didn't originally have breasts. I added breasts to a torso that I scanned from a museum here in Rome, which was of a Cyclops, they say. I loved the dubious sort of questioning of what something is. That's a lot of what my work is about, is like, you know, sculptural fragments, often they don't really know what they're from, and then there was a whole period of history where they would have artists create a complete sculpture. They'd say, oh, here's the head of, you know, here's a body of, you know, Juno, add a head, and they'll be like, this head looks like Juno, you know, and then they'll fix the arm, but the arm, you know, no one knows where the arm, what position it was in or whatever. So I'm all about like actually completing sculptures from fragments, and incorporating various like quotes from other things that I find that I think contribute. So like this is actually a fragment from a frieze of the temple of Vespasian and Titus, I believe it is, on the Roman Forum, and it's actually gigantic. And I just liked the motif because of its relationship with war, and this, you know, the Cyclops, and then I have like
Sphinx
sirens
on the side. Yeah,
sirens. These are actually sirens, because I'm trying to refer to Odysseus, whatever. Anyway, so I try to find lots of things that kind of just come into my head into one piece. This one is maybe not the most interesting set for showing the process, though.
How do you edit though when you, this is something I struggle with, because I actually, like, usually my files, like I have like 8 million components in them, and then all of a sudden I have to like kind of break it down and figure out which thing is the thing I want to be talking about. Like, how do you, as an artist, like when you're in there with all the different scans?
I don't ever have a million components. I because I know it's going to get nuts. And so sometimes we get like 11, and then I'm just like, look, you know, we have to cut this down. So like this one was one of the most complicated ones. So this one has like,
I love this one. This is one of my favorites.
32 subtools here. Hold on a second. Let me just like, I don't know my own files. Oh, right. That was something I intentionally broke apart. So like this one only has 4 right now, but at certain points must have had like upwards of 11-ish, you know, but usually if I get above 10, I start to panic. And you know, because I'll start doing this, I'll start making this list longer, and it's just like, whoa, you know, okay, let's calm down, let's not get crazy here, you know.
And
I always get rid of subtools by the end. I hate subtools. I like thinking of it as one final sculpture, since they're going to be standalone for mine.
But because you 3D print, sometimes you keep them separate, right? Like this one was for the 3D printing. So
no, I end up cutting them. I make new cuts for the 3D prints.
That's what I do too.
Smarter than me.
I put it into sections in NetFab.
NetFab.
Yeah, but you know, you deal with seams. You deal with themes. NetFab has registration keys, which is amazing. NetFab has, I just found this the other day. Yeah, pins.
I need to reinstall NetFab because
you string yours on like a pole. I have to make it so mine will stand and not knock over. So I have to design holes for weights. And like,
I got that tip from you actually, the putting rods through them. For structural support. That's really smart. Yeah.
That's one where I cut it up. This one is the copy of the Cyclops where I've sort of broken it up into pieces for printing, because in this case I just made straight cuts.
Oh yeah, that's nice.
You need a NetFab yet? I would have done this differently.
A NetFab trick.
We'll do a NetFab call. We'll do a whole other NetFab call. Yeah,
we really need to do a NetFab call.
Let's do it. NetFab geek out.
Let's see. I'm trying to find
something. To learn from you too, Sophie. I mean, I kind of just like do the bare minimum in NetFab, because I just, you know, it's like you find a workflow and you just kind of go in and go out like thing.
Yeah, no, NetFab is amazing. I've been deep into NetFab this past month.
Oh yeah.
Starting with shapeways.
But it's so fun, Auriea, to see your files and like in action, and to see also the history. I think about that too. It's like, every artist does this differently, but like, how do you come up with ideas, and how do you research for those ideas, and then how do you finalize those ideas into something you're going to be putting out there? And it's interesting.
This is a good file.
It's a good file.
But yeah, because like this one shows the base character that I started with. So this is Minoria. I was giving her horns so that she could become the ox character. So she was a fully 3D character that I used in a VR piece, and I just fell in love with her, and she became the basis of several sculptures actually. And she was the first one. She inspired me to actually make my first big sculpture.
Yeah.
Because I was so in love with hanging out with her in VR that I wanted to bring her into the world.
I think this was the first figure of yours that I remember seeing, and I guess it must have just been a render, because I know that I've been aware of your work for a while online, and I remember sending it to Claudia at one point, and it was either this or the fawn, the little fawn.
Those two were the first. So this is the sculpture that I made of that.
Beautiful.
Of that 3D model, and I'm wondering, and so what had happened was she ended up being kind of posed on the lap of the larger figure. And this is one where I started making this one too, which is Ram, and it's gone through a bunch of different phases. I didn't like this particular one, and it ended up being changed a lot before I made the final sculpture. Here's a version of this sculpture in progress. So in this one, I'm using the surface noise tools. To pose her, I posed her in Blender, actually, in Broadway. I do a lot of back and forth between ZBrush. The braid was, of course, done here. I put the other sculpture on her head. And then the cloth, I think I did in Blender and then brought it back. I didn't use the cloth tool here in ZBrush. But this one has like, I don't even know how many subtools we have.
Oh my.
So this is very much this is what it would look like, what it looks like in progress. Here, we have this cool feature here. We can use expose.
That's fun.
Expose is kind of fun when you want to see all your subtools. So you can see here how I'm trying to get this together. This is from a 3D scan, the legs.
Okay.
And that's from an angel in St. Peter's Cathedral. Here's the scan itself, the raw scan, which my scans are all often broken and a mess, but I don't care. Like I said,
no, it's nice to have that. It's like what Sophie does with hers too, where it's like you're seeing the flaws, you're seeing the holes, you're seeing the parts that aren't fully captured.
But actually, it's not what I don't actually like that so much. But the point is that I am doing it because I know I can fix this. Because I don't like broken stuff. Like I want it to be whole, but I know I can't capture that sometimes because it's just not convenient. I can't be standing there all day trying to get a perfect scan. So I just want the form. I wanted these legs. Like I wanted this shape. I wanted the connotations of the Baroque. I wanted, this sort of
like Rubens.
And so I stole this from my sculpture. I saw it. I took one look at it and said, you know what? That's part of my sculpture. Boom. And I brought it in and I started figuring out, how can I fix this? How can I fill those holes? What can I do with that? And I ended up doing this, which gave it a whole other Baroque air sort of feel.
Absolutely.
It's like a sunburst.
It's like a cloud of sun behind the head of the saint or whatever.
It's almost like, is it like a preliminary sketch for you or like a source image, like more than
it's like a source. It's like I just want the gesture. I want this movement. Another one that would be a good example of this, actually. I know I want that feeling. I don't need it to be perfect because I know how to sculpt. I don't need to.
You can fill in the gaps. You are part of that.
I can make it my own. You know what I mean? It's like I can take that and make it into something that I want it to be. But at the same time, I'm looking at that and I'm thinking that's it's got something that, this is a whole other discussion, but there's a certain thing that I feel ancient art has that we can't have because of photography, actually.
Interesting.
And I don't think that I can pretend that I can unsee the photographically. But I like being in this realm or this moment where people didn't have that way of seeing it all and they saw the world differently. It's what I love about art of the medieval world, and it's what I love about the art of the which is another kind of seeing, but art of the ancient world has a certain way of seeing.
It's not coming from a viewport, right? It's not coming
from a viewport. It's not a camera's eye.
From a single perspective. Frozen moment. It's like the archetype of the object.
And it's also pre-Renaissance where linear perspective was created. So seeing was you were breaking down space differently in those times.
Right, exactly. But in ancient art, things are incredibly precise an incredibly, what we might term realistic, or even, we don't even talk about ancient, you know, this is what the Baroque was trying to get back in some way, the Renaissance and the Baroque was trying to get back, was to this notion that things could be very precise and say something through the form that was about the hereafter, that was about something that was not of this world. You use the tools, the visions of this world to say something that about things that were not of this world. And that's what I appreciate about it. And that's why I use these form quotes, these, you know, sculptural quotes, you might say, is because I can't see that way. I can't see past what's in the world. You know, I can't see past the photograph. I can't see into the hereafter like they could, in a sense. You know, I see something else, you know, but I appreciate what they see in that it's giving me a kind of, I don't know what it is. I can't put
a jumping off point, like a jumping off point, like an impetus.
Yeah, but it's more like I know when I see it that it's saying the thing that I want to say, but I can't say, you know?
Yes.
And so, for example, this is the sculpture called Messenger, which is a dead quote from Bologna, obviously, you know, his sculpture of Hermes. But it's a 3D scan of my foot. I have like a very crooked foot, and I wanted to sculpt that as if it were perfect. Like, I mean, what I mean is like treat my deformity as if that is what the ideal is. Let's put it that way.
Yes.
And so that's kind of was the start of that sculpture, even though it's not entirely obvious. But to me, it was just like, yeah, okay, this is what we're doing. This wing is also from a 3D scan, but this computer is not set up properly. This was the scan. You know, it's like, it was kind of just like, or this one, maybe I did a few.
You could get like a couple curves out of that, maybe, you know, to
it just came about, it was like the shape, you know, the silhouette, the attitude, the way it was saying it. And then of course I had some photos and everything, and I took all of this and plus just messing around sculpting stuff, and that's where I ended up with the final piece. This is the low res version. Oh yeah, there we go. So I had to like go in and sculpt each feather and stuff like that. It was a nightmare, but it was also like, that's where you start getting into the fun part, where it's about this open and closed form. It's about like where you articulate, it becomes like painting. It's like, where do you go into detail and where do you leave it alone, you know? And that is what I love, is that one can start to have control over those moments where you leave stuff blurry and vague, or where you go in and you say, no, this is exactly what this is. And you end up with something that just, I don't know, says something. I don't know. I end up with something that I like. We'll put it that way. So these clouds, we're just like using the
swirl
or whatever.
Swirl
to make these clouds, you know, on form. But it's like, what I knew about this was that I was also looking at Piranesi, hardcore, his candelabras. I'm looking in candelabras and churches.
I love candelabras.
Yeah, right. I'm repeating my ram's head. This is from something else, and I don't remember where I scanned that. The legs are things that I made myself, you know. So it ends up being this whole notion. In this case, also I've got my little wind guys.
Oh, we love those.
Blowing on the wind, and then, you know, I don't know. I just wanted to make it, and I made it. But I love this.
It's the best reason.
That is, it's so, I mean, you know, it's your journey, like when you decided to become an artist and like pursue the art world is really interesting, because you kind of came in at this like ridiculously perfect moment to have both physical and digital works. And it's just, and you now have this platform in a way.
This is why I was laughing earlier about like, I don't want to be early with anything. I don't want to be first with anything. And then we end up with this NFTs, and I'm like, well, it doesn't make sense for me not to do this, you know. It's like I was weirded out and scared like anyone else would have been in the beginning, because it was also because I've been dealing with digital art for so long. It was such a different way of thinking about digital art that I wasn't sure, and I'm still not sure that I'm down with. And
like, would you call yourself a digital artist? We've gotten asked that too.
I do now. I actually started out calling myself a digital artist way back in the day when I was doing web design. My studio in New York City was called Intrapiate Digital Arts. And then after a while, it became unfashionable to call yourself a digital artist. And, remember, think back like 8 months ago, no one would
Oh, yeah, I remember.
Yeah,
I remember the fights about it.
Yeah.
So, but
and the whole,
I fought against calling myself a designer forever. And then I just was like, okay, I'm a designer. And then it's like, then I was a video game developer, even though I disagreed with that. But I've never disagreed with calling myself a digital artist at all. I call myself a 3D artist. I call myself a sculptor.
Yeah.
And just straight up. So this is the textured version of that became the AR work. As you can see, it's just taking the same thing. This is of course low res and and then everything is baked in detail. And that's something I remember when normal children gather around, I'll tell you about when normal maps came along. We didn't have those in the early 2000s.
Yeah, it was
but they're a godsend. And also PBR.
Yeah,
I don't know,
it's been blowing my mind in Substance. Just really recently, the ability to do the like cavity dirt and the edge wear, and that I'm like going crazy with that right now. I'm having so much fun.
It's amazing.
Me too. And are these
or new? Like this is something that started being a thing in like the 2010s at some point, and I had to relearn my whole way of thinking about texturing after texturing for like 9 years or something, 10 years. It was like, oh, you have to rethink all of that PBR, and I'm like, what? But it's been a godsend. It's been really amazing, not only in Substance, but just because that you can make any material you can imagine, and you can imagine a lot. So
I just have a quick question. Do you import different subtools, or are you doing one full thing and texturing?
One full painting. One full, thing that I make, but I texture. I don't know if this one is set up that way, but I do what's called a material ID map.
I do that too, with a unique for each part.
Color map. And then I use material IDs to assign textures to different parts. I think this one does that. Let me see. Yeah, here's my ID map here. So basically what that means is like if you hold down the control key and you drag something to it, see, you've got it broken up into different colors. So
I do mine by scan sweep actually, so I can do stripes.
Does that mean your UV map has separate parts?
What it means is that I assigned different colors to different parts of the UV map.
Okay.
It doesn't have this is in two parts actually, because I wanted the opaque parts separate from the glass, because Substance doesn't do too well if you try to do opaque and transparent parts in the same material. So I separated it into two. So this is in two pieces. But often I will have a one-piece mesh that I'm like texturing in that way, that I have these different material IDs set up. And that just keeps you from having a million materials over here. You'll figure this out. You'll hear me now and you'll understand me later why you don't want to have a whole bunch of materials over here, because each of these becomes their own set of layers. And then if you've got a million layers on a million materials, you're going to be ripping your hair out. I do end up with a lot of layers in Substance, as do most Substance. You see people's Substance Painter files, they're usually quite complex, but I'll use a combination of things, especially since ultimately I'm destining these things for the web, because I'm using a lot of WebGL, and that's how ultimately I deliver my AR, is through the web. Let me see if there's anything recent I can open.
It's nice to see your ARs in space too. I think it comes back to at least my experience of viewing your work, and you might have a different perspective of this, but it reminds me of the moment when you started your scan of something that kind of hooked you in, but the AR is bringing us to that space in a way and letting us kind of experience that feeling you had when you saw something that you felt like you needed to like interpret. Is that a good way
that's interesting. Yeah, that's a very interesting take on it. I think that's probably, yeah, that's really a good one.
Because I mean, I'm not in Rome, unfortunately. And I don't get to go to those like gorgeous spaces. And for me, being able to like put your work and you in that context and have you inserted in that, it helps me get to experience that feeling, which I think is what makes AR powerful too, is having that.
Yeah, that feeling but it comes from me being from the internet and thinking that artwork should be transmitted through the internet. And so when I started using web AR and stuff like this, it was amazing for me because I could suddenly give my sculptures to everyone, and everyone could witness this object, experience it in their space with their body, everything, even though it's just an illusion and like
doesn't matter.
No, but I mean, I think it's very powerful. And this is like, I know this is a conversation that we've had before, and this is something that I've seen you talk about in interviews as well, but the physical experience, like the AR is almost the closest thing that you can have to experiencing a physical sculpture. And there is a bodily relationship with it. Like you're moving around, you're looking up, and in VR too, that was mind blowing for me to see my work in VR, because I built something 50 feet high and I'm looking at it on a little screen, and that's
your show was amazing.
Thank you. I wanted to feel that scale. Yeah. And it was so liberating for me as a sculptor who'd been sitting around waiting for like 20 years for the first like $50,000 commission, or for the commercial gallery to come and take me on and bring me collectors and buckets of money to make enormous things. And like, so far that hasn't happened, as it has not for many artists. One day. But until that point, it allows people to see the work the way that you see it. And there's also, I love that you said that everybody can see it, because I think there's like a generosity and there's a democracy in that
well, but it's just built into the internet, it's like it's like, is this maybe I need to turn this down a little bit because I probably got it on some high res setting that is but this piece, what I'll do is I usually will have a basic sculpture that I sort of paint in different ways, and these become the different versions, and I'm kind of obsessed with the different versions. But what I love about something that you can do now with all this is I can get these kind of textures, these contrasts between matte and glossy and bumpy, and texture has always been a big part of my work. The texture, and I know you're sitting there, Colette, like you've got you're gonna enjoy this this fact of working in substance or whatever package you might
substance, I think I was meant to ZBrush, Substance, Blender, I think are the three. That's the trifecta.
For me, this is definitely the way that I work right now. There's a few other tools in the mix, but I think that these are the main ones, and I just really enjoy the I don't know, feeling you get from textures, and the color that I've been playing with a lot more. A lot of my work in real life is very monochrome, like which I'm trying to remedy with some more colorful work, which such as like
we haven't seen physical things yet.
Like in this case, it's not quite put together yet, but I'm 3D printing in resin, but I'm adding color to the resin.
Nice.
Lovely.
So this is a translucent resin that I've added dye to.
Beautiful.
Trying to get more color into the work that normally is just I'm not a material purist. Like I don't believe in the purity of materials or anything. I'm all about, like, if I've got to paint it, I paint it, and it really depends on the piece. Most of the time I'm looking at color and texture in the work because I'm jazzed by the idea that ancient sculptures were painted. I just love it.
Yeah, that's so cool.
Yeah,
we can't see it anymore, but we can imagine it,
right?
smoothed by time, but what was that texture? I try to use a lot of this sort of imagination about these things when I'm working on stuff.
Well, I think that the reason why it seems like, I mean, maybe one of the reasons you're so interested too in these like textures too for the work that's on the web is the sensory component. I mean, like when you see a physical sculpture, for me, the most powerful thing about making sculpture, and I didn't start making sculpture until I think it was 2014, what is that it just demands, it also demands a presence and a physical interaction when you're around a sculpture that a image on the wall has a different feeling unless you make it massive and there's, all of these things. But when I'm experiencing this jumping into substance and like making my first, NFT, and like that this gives me a chance to play with a different sensory, experience. And I think that's what you're doing too in that sense, or maybe, but like is the color like experiencing color on a screen is so different than in the physical world because it's dealing with a different color system. It's dealing with the additive color system or the RGB, and those wavelengths are going directly into your instead of bouncing. So it's like you're getting a whole different physical reaction and sensory reaction, different medium, just a different medium. And how you play with that medium, I think is so interesting. And it's so nice because since you do all that research beforehand, you never have to worry about your naming. A lot of artists hate making titles for their work. I personally love it, but you've got it all built in.
I kind of, they have titles that just stick with them. And, then I don't tend to change them ever, even when I want to. So my titles end up being very simple. So this is going to be a sculpture, a series or whatever of self-portraits, sort of, but as these sort of mythological. I don't know. It's in progress, and it has been in progress.
Close over the face is really interesting.
And so I end up doing things like this, it'll just be hanging out here for years at a time, and I just will keep coming back to it. But this one is definitely happening, this much I know. Oh, one that recently, wait, let me not stop this, but I was trying to think of something else I could show you before we stopped sharing screens. Echo. So this one was one I recently made, finally got around to the prototyping stage, and it's in my show in Los Angeles.
In LA, I saw those pictures.
For me, it all started with a photo. This copyright photo, I'm sorry, I don't know who took it. I found it on Tumblr like 6 years ago or something, and I was just intrigued, completely captivated by the photo. And it just spoke to me, and so I kept it. Because I have, like most people, a folder full of JPEGs of just images that turn me on in some way, that like really that trigger something. I don't know.
And I know so exactly what you're saying. Yeah.
That I always knew I was gonna use in some way.
You should send the Pinterest link. It's an amazing Pinterest collection.
I have an insane digital hoarding problem on Pinterest. So
I have a huge digital hoarding problem, and so I took the pose in this case and had my husband help me 3D scan myself, and then it was just a question of how I could tell the story of Echo. Echo and Narcissus, Echo being in love with Narcissus, follows him around repeating the last words he says. And so to me, that was the sculpture that came from that image, even though that's not what that image was, it's like, that's what it became for me. And
well, it's a composition that communicates what you were trying to say in that sense, maybe.
In some ways. And so
beautiful.
But it's just it was just bending over, touching the water. And I realized that was the thing that was the reason why I couldn't get rid of the image, was she was touching the water. And for some reason, this was like a very soft gesture, but for something that is actually quite a violent story, where she ends up just wasting away, and is only a voice left. And so I was trying to figure out how could I communicate this notion of echoing in form, you know, and not in sound. And so this is the sculpture that came of that. It's and I finally printed the version of it. However, I know that when I do the final version, there's never a final.
No.
But it's going to be, maybe I can figure out if I can open one of these echo work, maybe. It's like I never know which one is, or is echo to V to A.
I know.
I hate it when I do that, but I always do it.
I'm just thinking about logistics for that piece, like when you print it, how it's going to stand, like what, you know, like what this is where my brain is going right now.
This one, it was a big nightmare. My husband got sick of me talking about how am I going to make it stand up, because in 3D it just floats, you know, and that's where its ideal state, you know. So when I make an AR version of this, that's what's going to happen. Right. And I'll probably rethink this whole water bit. So this is where it is in Blender, where I'll ultimately cut things up and try to make sense out of them so that I can print them. But yeah, so I eventually ended up just attaching it to the wall with a bolt, a really long bolt. But it's still not ideal for me. And I think because the final piece is gonna be so much bigger. The next final I'm wondering if I have a picture of it. I do, of course, somewhere.
Love that bolt into the wall. I mean, I wonder how long it needs to come out in order to have that impact for the viewer, like walking around it.
A 12 centimeter bolt or something. Like I found on Amazon, but it works great. It was the perfect solution because I wanted it to float. I try not to go against those. Like, it doesn't sound logical, like, oh, it's floating in 3D, so I want it to float in the real world, but I just try to think of how I can make it float. I did this idea of the floating came from this exhibition I did several years ago. This was actually the first exhibition, we'll call it the first. It's actually the second exhibition I did when I decided I wanted to do exhibitions. This was at a gallery called Project in Omaha, Nebraska, curated by Alex Meyer. And I sent him this rendering and I was like, these are my objects, they're going to be on a floating table. And I thought that he would just be like, yeah, okay, floating table, you know, because I have yet to see my work installed, guys. Like, this was also before pandemic.
Yeah.
So he made for me a floating table. And it's basically just, you know,
is it wall mounted in the back? Oh, with wire.
No, it's hanging from the ceiling. It's wire.
See the wire. It took me a long time.
And
that's great.
But in some photos, you just can't see the wire. And so there was one of his daughter, like a video of his daughter, like underneath the table. And it was so cute because it looked like a magic trick.
Yeah.
And
love that.
And that's what I was totally going for. So I try not to go against these feelings of like, if I go, oh, it should be floating, that I just try to find a way to make it
just float. Go with it.
You shouldn't, and gravity should not bring you down.
No, absolutely not. So this is a picture of the sculpture.
Gorgeous.
Beautiful. What is that printed in? Is that resin?
That's resin. The top should have been black resin and the rest clear resin, but what happened was I printed it in white and then painted it with a bronze paint that I patinaed black, but then I was able to leave the mouth white. You can't see it in this photo.
But you see the teeth. Yeah.
Yeah, and so that becomes again cream. This is mounted upside down. It wasn't mounted upside down show, but so that's more like what in better lighting what it looks like.
Yeah, that's really beautiful.
Yeah, it's just but I'm gonna in the final version I'm gonna keep that idea of the white in the mouth. You see a prototype ends up being kind of a crazy situation where I'm just throwing things together and gluing them, and and using clay, and I love using epoxy clay. Epoxy clay is my heart right now. Like it's glue, it's clay, it's everything.
You and Grace Lee. Grace Lee's obsessed with epoxy clay. I love it.
Yeah, epoxy clay is the best. So like I went crazy with the epoxy clay here, but I started thinking more when I was making this sculpture about what it means to use the epoxy clay a bit more. I had better pictures to show you.
Oh, I like this one on the mirror too. Like that's
that's a great idea.
Reflection.
Yeah, having it on the mirror was the master stroke. I designed my own pedestals often, and so I'll be sending this sort of thing to the gallery, and hoping they don't think I'm crazy and not want to do it.
That's amazing that you get to like have those produced. And design up.
The gallery will work with you if they don't have. Yeah, this is a whole other conversation, but I dislike most gallery situations. Like I hate white walls. I don't like, I want things to be, it comes also from game design, me wanting to control the environment and make people feel transported into it.
Absolutely.
The show in LA is a group show, so I didn't have much to say about it, but I was able to get one.
Your own pedestal, that's really nice.
I forget what else I could show you about that, but so this piece is this is my iterative process in the sense that I've done the digital sculpture that can become AR, and that goes off iterating in that direction. And then this is the first prototype, but then I know that I'm going to make further iterations on this sculpture. And in the end, try to make it match more with the story. And the thing that I saw in that photograph that made me want to keep it all these years, and that made me derive a sculpture from it, like getting closer and closer to that feeling, and closer to the story, closer to myself, and embodying that, which might require me to go back and do things to the 3D model, and in turn will change the AR. And that's why everything in all my titles end up being simple, so this is Echo version 1, and then there'll be a digital version 1, digital version 2, and then there'll be Echo version 2, digital vision. Because I might do, like, there was along the way another image that came of this that I have somewhere that I just know is going to end up being digital version 2 of Echo, but I probably can't find it right now.
I know, it's tough.
Another thing that I love about your work too, though, and it's actually like another thing that's been influential for me, is like, because when you have something that begins with a file, there are so many outputs, so many potential forms that it could take.
Beautiful.
And it's to let it be, to let it breathe and evolve and multiply.
To let it be is impossible.
Well, that's maybe not quite the term I was talking about, but to to allow it to be kind of multiple, and to allow it to evolve, and to not think I have to fix it into this one form. Because I used to obsess. I would think like I had this scan, what is the one and only form that I must materialize this in? And now I'm letting these forms like multiply through the work and pop up in different ways. And then sometimes I'll take an old sculpture and I'll repaint it, and then it's a different sculpture, and I'll give it a date that's like 2016 to 21, but then it could be a print or a video. And so I think that it does more justice to the inherent like mutability of digital files, to allow them to repeat through the work. And it's something I used to not do. I used to feel that it was kind of, there was something wrong about that, and now I'm much more like relaxed,
open to it.
Well,
I'm from the, like I said, this idea of the digital, where the digital doesn't have to end. And that's one of the things that drove me to digital art, drove me to digital work, was that it was iterative, and it was this notion that it was part of my life, that the work could evolve along with me, that I can continue to evolve and change. Perhaps the sculpture does as well, even if I have to program it to do so, that kind of thing, and that's what I loved about working with games and creating digital life, and what I still love about sculpture right now. And in this moment, this new moment when digital sculpture can be something that I can say unironically and not have to explain it. And, you know, and I don't feel in between things. I feel like I'm a speaker, and whether I'm working digitally or I'm working physically. That's pretty awesome, actually.
Yeah. No, and I just got a plotter, so I'm very excited.
Yeah, actually, mine's coming today. Mine's coming in an hour.
I haven't used it, but I want to, after this show, I want to start exploring with my drawings again. And it's been a while. It's been a couple years since I've really like put something into a two-dimensional form that made sense for me, because so I was like, I want to play around with, you know, the idea of, because for me, software is a collaboration. Like it's not about, it's like, it's not really about the machine or the tool or the piece of software. It's just about this fun back and forth that happens between, and it's true, you have to get knowledgeable to an extent. Otherwise you're just going to be poking around watching tutorials only. But there is that, and I feel that way.
There's an uncontrolled element, right? There's an element of surprise.
Exactly, because I used to do, when I was doing these Rorschach ink blot drawings, I used to make the Rorschach ink blots myself, and that fun ridiculousness that happened when you'd smash those two pieces of paper together was magical. And it was like, it feels the same as like right now when I'm like playing around with color ramps in Blender to create these like auras. It's this like kind of sensory magic that I feel the same way when I'm melting too, like, or when I figure out a new drawing method, or like, I don't know, it's just all of that kind of alchemy.
Plotter though, I've got one as well. I tried to, what I originally got it for was I wanted to do, sounds absurd now, silver point. So I did several of these, but it was not satisfactory because there's no pressure on the point. And so I would have to have it draw again and again and again and again, which was kind of interesting, but it was time consuming. Anyway, so it's like I might go back to that one day. It's like, so that's why the plotter is sort of hanging on my wall, but like I can't wait to see what you do with it. Colette, it's going to be really,
I want to see it collaboratively. Like I want to bring in some of the imagery that I'm doing, but in more of like a vector format, and then just play and let myself just do what I do when I get to a material, which is just, I lose myself and go straight into intuition. I feel the most intuitive when I have a collaborator, whether it's a software or a medium, anything. It's, you know.
Is it possible for you to share your screen in so I can see what you did in with the seer there, on your screen?
Oh, with Blender?
Yeah, or with
sure. I'll share. We'll do a. Yeah, so I'll show you. Can you see it?
Yeah, I see it. It's beautiful.
So
wow.
This is how I'm generating. I basically just created this kind of backdrop, and again,
the sculpture is textured in substance, though.
Yes, so that's the first time I've done my own. I did the process in ZBrush and then UV mapped it, but then created displacement maps and stuff in Substance, like with that UV map, and then I just played, and I didn't give myself any parameters, because the only way I'll get into learning something is if I allow myself that playtime. Otherwise it's just too dry. So I just wanted to make something that maybe I wasn't interested in making in the physical space. I wanted to really let it live. And then these like mixing nodes and these color ramps are so awesome, because then it's just like, you can generate these all sorts of fun, I was thinking about the idea of an aura just as like, because she's called the fortune teller, and then she's also like, and I needed something to project like an all-seeing eye, an omniscient eye during the pandemic. And so that's kind of what she became, as much as it's not about believing in that, what a fortune teller is. It's about the idea of the fortune teller, the story that happens just when you say those two words. And then the idea of then her having her like digital aura that's generated by these like nodes is, and by me just completely playing, like I've got a separate set of ramps on the plane below, and just like playing with that too. And then the fact that Blender takes one set, and I'm using, so with Blender, I am using the, what is it called? The render that I'm using is the EV render, right? Yeah. And I really love this screen space reflection, so that then, when she's, when she's getting those lovely little colors kind of going onto this shiny surface. And I also got real crazy with substance, like layering skin textures and like just being over the top, because I was like, I'm just going to let myself go, because this is the first foray into me presenting anything digitally as a sculpture, because it's been kind of a long time coming. And of course, Sophie has been, and you, Auriea, have been instrumental in like that, opening that up, because again, you started exactly kind of how I started drawing. I didn't do sculpture, but just like I went to Parsons as well, like for grad school. But, and then so I kind of have this backwards journey in terms of getting into anything digital. But I'm proud of that journey. It's mine. And, and I love that I can bring those like figure drawing sensibilities into the screen, but also off the screen too, and back into, as when I'm composing, like that one is all failed prints. So when I first got the Creality, I agree. I use everything. What happened with this one is that, I'll bring this one over, kind of match my art today. But this one, like all of these parts were going into this other sculpture. And then eventually I put a bunch of rods inside of these, but I saw it as another form, and that really made me happy. And then I started putting it together and exploring as I would if it was like made out of clay. So, but the texture on this one, I mean, I don't have my HD camera on, but it has some beautiful like texturing, but the Creality does not do well with the copper filament, and it kept jamming the tube. And so I'm giving up. And then this is and this one, so this is one of my tricks when I put these together, is when I peel a loop, if there's a little space, I'll stick like little like parts from, and then I'll melt it all down and create. That's so this really is smart. I created the seam here. I haven't painted it yet. It's this is just sanded, and I'm gonna do a paint coat, and then it's gonna be like. So it's like, it's inspired by those ancient helmets, and I'll share my Pinterest board if you're interested in it. I've got all of my sources digitally hoarded there.
We need to do, I mean, as if we have time right now. We don't have time.
I can't get into Pinterest anymore. I was addicted to Pinterest for a little bit years ago, and then I discovered like, well, why don't I just collect all these JPEGs in a folder, and then I don't have to deal with Pinterest. And so that's where my ref folders, my giant inspiration folder, which is sort of semi-organized, and then I have like a art collection folder, and then I've got like each project has its own references, and like I just try to stay away from Pinterest.
Yeah, it relates to existence. Yeah.
We need though. What I was thinking is like we need like Instagram takeover for a week, and just post like all of our reference, or have an account.
Oh my God, I think that would have to be